The story opens with Frank driving toward his in-laws' home for Christmas dinner. In the back seat sat his wife Laura, their daughter Marion, and son Richard. Exhausted, Frank glances at his family sleeping quietly in the car as he continues down the road. Fatigue overwhelms him, and he drifts off for a brief moment. Suddenly, Frank nearly collides with another car. Screams fill the vehicle, panic spreading, but somehow they escape without injury. After the frightening moment, Laura scolds Frank for nodding off while driving and worries about the Christmas pie she brought along. They take an alternate route, and Frank inspects the car for damage. To his relief, the car appears unharmed, and the other vehicle has vanished. He resumes driving. Laura notices something unusual, a woman dressed in white standing on the roadside. Frank dismisses it, remarking, "Everyone is home with their families tonight." Marion complains of feeling carsick, while Richard teases her mercilessly. Tensions rise when Laura drinks straight from a water bottle, irritating the others, sparking an argument about sharing drinks. Marion tries to mediate, but Richard continues to mock her and her boyfriend, Brad. Amid the chaos, they attempt to lift their spirits by singing Jingle Bells. Abruptly, Frank slams on the brakes. He claims he saw a woman in white holding a baby in the nearby woods. They all peer into the darkness, searching for her. Suddenly, she appears at the car window, startling everyone. Concerned, Frank asks if she's all right, noticing a bruise on her face. She seems dazed and silent. Frank suggests calling for help, but Brad checks his phone and finds no signal. Frank offers to drive her somewhere safe, hoping for a nearby cabin. Brad and Richard hesitate to leave their seats, so Marion decides to walk toward a cabin to get fresh air and ease her nausea. The woman in white, holding a crying infant, climbs into the car. Laura tries to speak to her, but the woman remains unresponsive, lost in shock. They arrive at a small cabin. Richard wanders into the woods behaving oddly, looking at magazines and even engaging in inappropriate behavior. Meanwhile, Frank and Laura inspect the cabin, leaving Brad and the woman alone in the car. Brad attempts to talk to her, but she stays silent. Walking alone, Marion reflects on her recent breakup. Inside the cabin, Frank tries calling for assistance, but the phone doesn't work. Suddenly, the woman in white speaks to Brad, revealing her baby's name is Emmy. She hands the baby to Brad, who recoils in horror upon noticing the child is covered in blood, screaming in fright. Hearing the commotion, Frank and Laura rush outside, only to find both Brad and the woman in white have disappeared. Nearby, Marion sees Brad inside a black hearse through a rear window. Realizing he's been taken, she runs to warn her parents. Frank speeds after the hearse but crashes into an unknown object. A body lies lifeless on the road. Shocked, Frank instructs Marion to stay back. Richard helps his parents retrieve the phone from Brad's mangled corpse. Laura attempts to call the authorities, but instead of reaching them, a woman crying for help answers. Panicked, Laura insists the line is broken and that they must keep moving. Frank refuses to leave Brad's body behind. Richard helps place the dead man in the trunk. Overwhelmed, Laura slaps Marion to snap her out of shock. Frank soothes her. Trembling, Richard suggests the killer may have used a chainsaw or an axe. Frank vows to go to the police, but as they drive, they see a sign for Merritt, a town none of them recognize. They check the map. Merritt is nowhere listed. Fear and frustration mount as they argue. They notice all the car clocks are frozen at exactly 7:30. Richard speculates that this could be some kind of extraterrestrial activity, considering what has happened to Brad and others. Frank and Laura dismiss his theory, while Marion, still in shock, remains silent. They start singing Jingle Bells again, which annoys everyone in the car. As they continue down the road, they spot a baby stroller abandoned in the middle of the street. Laura wants to ignore it, but Richard gets out to investigate. He cracks a joke about being eaten by something, trying to lighten the tense mood. Frank and Laura step out, irritated by Richard's antics, and push the stroller to the side. Frank grabs a bottle of whiskey from the car and takes a drink, despite Laura insisting it's meant as a Christmas present. Richard attempts to talk to Marion, but she remains frozen in shock, unresponsive. Soon after, Richard notices the stroller again up ahead and warns his parents. They dismiss him, assuming he's joking. Frank moves the stroller once more, and they resume driving, but the tension in the car rises. Frank and Laura argue, while the radio suddenly emits eerie sounds of a crying baby. Unexpectedly, a tire blows out, leaving the family stranded. At that moment, Marion shocks everyone by revealing she is pregnant. Richard admits he's been using drugs. Feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, Frank gets out to fix the flat tire. Laura asks about Richard, and Frank tells her he's probably smoking in the woods. Richard is indeed in the forest, where he encounters the woman in white. She approaches him, and they share a kiss. Then she violently tears his lower lip. Terrified yet infatuated, Richard tells her he loves her. She suddenly strips completely, and Richard screams in horror. Meanwhile, Frank, Marion, and Laura witness Richard being forcibly taken by a black car. They chase after it but lose sight of him. Eventually, they find his mutilated body in the woods. Overcome with grief, they break down, crying. Laura, distraught, confesses to Frank that he is not Richard's biological father. She had an affair with a man named Alan in the past. Frank is crushed by the revelation. Tears streaming, Frank takes Laura into the car while Marion sits beside Richard's corpse, sobbing. Frank insists they must contact the police. In shock, Marion opens a Christmas gift, discovering a gun that belonged to Laura's gun-obsessed brother, and hands it to Frank. He loads it, preparing for what might come. Laura sits in the back seat, eating like a child. Suddenly, she tells Frank that Richard's real name was M.O. As they continue driving, they keep seeing signs for Merritt, heightening the unsettling feeling around them. Marion and Frank notice Laura's behavior growing increasingly erratic. She seems to be losing her grip on reality. Marion quietly tells Frank, sooner or later, Laura will have to face the truth. Frank stares ahead, worried. "We might never reach Merritt," he says. "That woman in white, I saw her in the woods earlier. Maybe she's the one we should worry about first." Frank recalls a story from his childhood, telling Marion that it reminds him of a tale his grandfather once shared. Meanwhile, Laura is drawing something disturbing. In her sketch, she depicts Brad being mutilated, which worries Frank and Marion even more. Suddenly, Frank remembers another event from his past. He tells Marion about a family who once picked up a little girl sitting by the side of the road with a schoolbook labeled Rose. When they drove away, they heard her scream. Looking back, the girl had vanished, leaving only her schoolbook. Frank recalls that the entire Rose family had died in a tragic car accident, wondering if this story connects to their current nightmare. Marion dismisses it as mere folklore. Laura's behavior becomes more childlike. She eats bizarre things and appears ill. She exits the car and vomits by the roadside. Marion asks Frank about the man Laura claimed to have an affair with. Frank shakes his head. "She's just in shock," he says. "There's no one named Alan." Then Laura finds a gun in the car. Mistaking it for a toy, she begins playing with it, pointing it at Frank and Marion. When Frank informs her that Richard is dead, she lashes out in anger and fires at Frank's leg, wounding him badly. Marion quickly tends to Frank's injury, cleaning and bandaging it, but he insists on continuing to drive. He tells them they must be on Naval Base Military Road, explaining why they haven't found a way out yet. Exhausted, Marion falls asleep briefly. Upon waking, she notices Frank is no longer in the car. She looks around and sees him outside, speaking to someone. They embrace, then spot Laura outside the vehicle as well. Laura tells them they need to stay together. She says she understands Frank and Marion's bond and claims she can see faces outside the car windows. They all looked so sorrowful. Then Laura claimed she spotted a friend who had passed away and asked Frank to stop so she could see her. Frank refused, but suddenly Laura opened the car door and jumped out. Frank and Marion quickly slammed on the brakes to follow her. They first noticed her shoes lying on the ground, then saw her being dragged away by a black hearse. Frank fired at the hearse in an attempt to stop it, and to their relief, Laura staggered back toward them. She said she was fine, but complained of a headache. When they examined her, they realized her skull was split open. She rubbed her head, slowly recalling a night with Alan, the man she had an affair with, and the moment she told her father she made the cheerleading squad before she died. Overcome with grief, Frank closed her eyes and helped her into the car. Both he and Marion felt utterly hopeless, unsure of how to escape this nightmare. In desperation, Frank raised the gun to his chin, considering ending his life. Marion's frightened cries stopped him. They agreed to keep driving, searching for any way out. As they headed toward Merritt, Frank recounted to Marion that Alan had been his friend back in Detroit. Alan had sought his advice about a married woman, Laura. Frank explained that Alan wanted to know whether he should continue the affair. Frank admitted he had encouraged him, saying, "You only live once." The last time Frank saw Alan, he had been told Laura wanted to end the affair because she now had a little girl, Marion. Frank took a sip of whiskey to steady himself. Angrily, Marion tossed the bottle out the window. Exhausted and desperate, Frank suggested they needed to leave the woods because they couldn't keep going in this state. But after driving for some time, they realized they had circled back to where they started. They continued driving, with Frank listing things he wanted to do once this ordeal ended, things he hadn't shared with Marion. Then, unexpectedly, they were forced to stop again. Frank realized they were back at the cabin where everything had begun. It felt as though some cruel game was being played on them. He lit a match to peer inside, but suddenly the woman in white appeared behind him and extinguished it. Hearing strange noises, Marion ran into the cabin to investigate. When she stepped outside, she saw Frank and called out to him. They walked back toward the car, but Frank was beginning to act strangely, almost like Laura, confused and unstable. He asked Marion for whiskey, but she threw the bottle away. Frank, now losing control, started attacking Marion until she lost consciousness. When he finally realized what he had done, he was horrified. He helped her into the car and tried to regain his composure. Outside, the woman in white was walking into the woods. Frank chased after her, shooting, but was killed in the attempt. Meanwhile, unconscious, Marion dreamed. She saw her family's bodies lined up, with a hearse coming toward her. She feared it was meant for her, but the woman in white passed her by, saying she wasn't the one the car was for, and climbed into a black vehicle herself. Suddenly, Marion awoke in a hospital bed. A female doctor stood over her, wearing a name tag that read Dr. Merritt. A man in black was nearby, explaining that he had found her after the crash. The doctor told her everyone else had died in the accident, everyone except Marion. They went out to the parking lot, but the doctor's car wouldn't start. The man offered her a ride in his own vehicle, a black hearse. Marion was taken aback by the vintage car, and the man explained he was a collector. As she looked at the strange yet beautiful vehicle, Marion wondered what would happen next. The nightmare appeared to be over, or so she thought. And if your entertainment stops here, wouldn't that leave you in a nightmare too? That's why you can click on my recaps to the right to keep the story going. Don't forget to subscribe for more uploads. As always, grab your popcorn, enjoy the show, and see you soon, my friend.